Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Josh, awfully good to see you.
Good to see you, Senator.
Is that that seat instead of one of those back there?
Yeah. I was going to say parking's a little harder.
So, does the department have any? Have you thought at all about what the potential size or increase in the amount of net metering that might occur by making this definitional change?
So it really depends on what the newly eligible entities decide to do. It could be, there's probably, I know there might be some folks from the Housing Authority here in the state, just a cursory look, there's probably about a dozen or so, maybe 18 across the state. Depends if they decide to sign up to do this, if they decide to exercise the option or not, because it's enabling. We really can't say how many would participate. I'll just say under the existing statute, we actually have had 3 applications total that have come into the department. 2 so far have been approved. 1 just came in last week, so it's still in the review process. But I know there's lots of discussions with folks about bigger projects. Given that the effective date was just in August, there's still a lot of discussion. We're getting a lot of phone calls, inquiries, things like that. So we know there are other projects out there that people are sort of trying to put the pieces together.
I may follow up. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Josh. So, I'm trying to remember whether you were following along the LEAP committee last summer that was looking at, issues arising from net metering and distribution. And it seemed to me that the report from that committee indicates that it's not exactly moot, or not exactly negligible, but that there was a lot of clarification that this program in and of itself was not going to result in cost shifting, or the way it was using the distribution system was unlikely to do that. So, given that impression of the committee's report, if you agree with that, that any concerns about this potentially shifting costs or increasing distribution charges beyond the kind of what was understood in that would not really be an issue.
So 2 points to that. The department is currently underway. Actually, we inherited from the PUC the VDRS, or the Value of Distributed Energy Resources study. We're currently working with a consultant to sort of figure out that on the transmission side, are you reducing transmission costs by having distributed generation versus on the other side, you are paying slightly higher than maybe necessarily, well, not in days to like today, but higher than necessarily wholesale rates versus the default service rate that you were paying through the net metering tariff. That's still underway. We really can't speak to the amount of cost shifting that may or may not occur, if there's any at all, and then balancing both sides. It may be higher on the electric side, but you're reducing your costs on your transmission side, so it may wash out. Long story short, we expect to have that study completed by the late spring of this year, so it should help us, give us more answers as to that. To the first part of it, given the limited number of entities that are eligible under this legislation, if there is any cost shifting, it would be the aggregate amount would be minimal, just because of the limited number of entities involved.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Anybody in the audience care to speak on this matter before we close it? Senators, okay. Seeing none, thank you very much. And we're going to close the hearing on SB 259, and we recognize Senator Perkins Cuoca to introduce her bill. Senator Perkins Cuoca.
Good morning, Chairman. For the record, I am Senator Rebecca Perkins Cuoca from Senate District 21, representing the City of Portsmouth, towns of Madbury, Lee, Durham, Newington, Newmarket, and Newfields. I am the prime sponsor of SB 370 FN, an act allowing the university system, community college system, and Pease Development Authority to be political subdivisions under this new statute. SB 370 is submitted at the request of the University of New Hampshire, but also has the collaboration of the Pease Development Authority in my district. I have a lot of technical jargon here to explain the bill, but since I think it's been pretty thoroughly addressed in the previous hearing, I won't really go into it, but I would like to draw your attention to Amendment 0023S, where we name the Pease Development Authority as a state entity that is able to take advantage of this exception to net metering. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know others are here to testify on behalf of the bill, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Oh, Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator. So I just had a question about the wording. And
Sure.
in either version, if you get down towards the last couple lines, so I don't know, maybe you want me to speak to the amendment. On lines 17 and 18. So I just wondered about the use of the "or" there on line 18. So any district or entity created for special purpose or funded. And I'm just not sure whether or not that "or funded" goes with district or entity created. So are you meaning that any district or entity funded by any of the above named governmental units?
Yeah, I can
So
speak.
let me follow up with that, sorry. Because
Yeah.
we fund a whole lot of things,
Sure.
right? So
Yeah.
anything that's funded by the state?
So I'm not really making a change to that language. That is how the
Yeah.
statute read as passed last year. But when we were reviewing it with the Pease Development Authority, they're considered to be a state entity. And so we were paying special attention to how this last clause was worded. And we felt that it was also confusing. So the proposal that I have here to remove administered is sort of to clarify that it says any district or entity created for a special purpose or funded by any of the above named governmental units. So to clarify basically that any state public entity would qualify, yes.
Yeah,
Which I
thank
think
you,
is the
Mr. Chairman.
intention of
I guess I'll go
Senator
talk to the
Abar's bill.
drafting
Yeah.
attorney, because, I think by crossing out the administered, you see
Yeah.
what I'm saying? I think it orphans that word "or." And I just want to make sure I understand what's going on there.
Yeah, I agree the drafting is less than
I'll-
ideal,
I'll
and I'm
check it
open
out.
to
Thank you.
changes.
That's the grammarian me, but
No,
that makes a
that's-
difference.
No, we want to help orphans, so.
Any
Any,
further questions?
Senator Gaida?
Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I too have some concerns, given the plethora of things that we fund, that this may be far too expansive at this point as we're making our progression down the line. So I would be willing to entertain an amendment to that effect, and just for the record. Thank you.
okay, so just to clarify, would it address both of your concerns if we removed the change in line 18? Because I don't think that's critical to the purpose I'm trying to achieve.
I would agree, yeah.
Okay. David, or
Senator
Senator?
Waters?
I mean, just take out the striking out of administered?
Yeah,
Well, why don't you check with the drafting attorney on that,
Okay.
okay?
I was just trying to see if that would
Just
add-
check, because I've gotten myself completely confused,
okay.
okay? Thank you.
But,
No
yeah,
problem.
yeah, we're not, have to exec it today either, so.
No, just asking to clarify. Okay,
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Senator.
thank you, sir.
Kelly Buchanan. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record this time, my name is Kelly Buchanan. I'm the Director of Legislative and Regulatory Affairs for Clean Energy, New Hampshire. And I'm here before you today to testify in support of Senate Bill 370, which would add the university system as well as the community college system and state entities, as well as the Pease Development Authority, as we've heard this morning, to the definition of a political subdivision of the state. We think this really reflects the nature of the university system and the other mentioned entities more clearly. It clarifies the statute in a way that we find is helpful. And for anecdotally, we had some questions from the University of New Hampshire back in the summer. Seems like forever ago. And they were really interested in participating in this, but they were told that they were ineligible. And we see that just as a confusion around the definition of a political subdivision, because they truly are a public higher education entity. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions. This is a pretty simplistic bill, drafting delicacies aside.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Rob, I don't have you signed up either way, but if you'd like to speak again?
That's a written testimony. I'll
Yep.
hand it over here. So,
All right,
thank you.
thank you. Tom Cronin? And you're with UNH?
Correct. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Tom Cronin. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the University System of New Hampshire. I'm here with my colleague, Matt O'Keefe, who's the Director of Energy and Utilities at the university. So first, thank you for having us here this morning. Thank you to the sponsors of this legislation for giving us an opportunity to talk about how the state universities, college universities can be part of this expansion in net metering. I think what I'd actually like to do is turn the floor over to my colleague Matt for a moment, just to speak for a second about the energy operations at the university, so you can hear a little bit more about our work and how we think we could benefit from this. Maybe just one point of clarification, particularly to 259, if I could. To the degree the committee is interested in moving some or all of these forward, we would request, if possible, to explicitly call out both USNH and CCSNH in statute. We are, as you know, a body corporate and politic of the state. So there, I think the underlying reason some of us are here today, some confusion about exactly where we fit if you just say the state of New Hampshire. So explicitly calling us out just makes it a little bit clearer and a little bit easier. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt.
Welcome, Matt.
Morning. As Tom mentioned, Matt O'Keefe, Director of Energy and Utilities at UNH. So our facility that we currently operate has a combined heat and power plant that runs a 7.9 megawatt gas turbine generator. So we're not talking about that system. But we also have a 4.6 megawatt gas turbine already purchased, already running, that when we have excess landfill gas available to bring to campus, we'll operate and send it out to the grid, help offset the costs, the capital costs of our initial project about 12 years ago. So we're looking to be able to participate in this program. We already do as a off-taker of energy from small hydro facilities. We actually work with Bart Frumeth's group, Freedom Energy, to help facilitate that. But we're also looking at what we can do ourselves, also working with other partners that we have within the town of Durham, as well as other campuses throughout the state in our service territory.
Questions from the committee? Just give us an idea. How will this benefit Durham?
The town of Durham. So we share a bunch of different utility systems, utility infrastructure. So the town of Durham runs a wastewater treatment facility, which takes all of the wastewater from both the campus and the town of Durham. We operate a water treatment facility, which provides the drinking water to the campus and the town of Durham. So the cost to operate both those facilities is a shared cost system. So that would be one of the ways that we might be able to defray some of the operating costs of the wastewater treatment facility. We also participate with other community programs, microgrid opportunities with the town of Durham, the Oyster River School District, et cetera. So it gives us the opportunity to look more closely at those in the future.
Fantastic. Do you have any more further statements at all?
I don't think so. I think maybe just to add to that piece, and our other hope in passing this would also be to both support to help bring down the cost of energy at the university, and we think probably across both the system and, if they're willing, the community college system through this program. So,
Great.
In addition to the municipal benefits.
All right. Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate it. Let's see. Josh Elliott. Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Again, Josh Elliott, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs, the New Hampshire Department of Energy. Similar comments that I spoke to on Senate Bill 259 also apply here. I also just want to say, I probably should have started with this. The Department of Energy is brand new, well, newish, 6 months old at this point, 7 months old. We're here to be a resource for you as the legislators. Feel free to give us a call anytime if you have dealing with technical issues or trying to figure out legislation or how to accomplish things, we have the resources to help you out, as well as daily to help bring you up to speed. I know there's a lot of acronyms thrown around, so we're always, I know you've talked to Griffin a lot, but we're always happy to help. The one thing I would point out, given that you're amending the same section of statute in both 259 and 370, just to make sure at some point through the process that I realize there might be other considerations to have these in separate pieces of legislation, but whenever there's a final product decided on, once we get to committee of conference time and wrapping everything up, to make sure it's all in one bill, because otherwise you'll have overlapping bills. One will override the other one depending on the effective dates. I know they're both 60 days after passage, but you could run into a mid-air collision where whatever signed last ends up being law and the first one just disappears.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Questions from the committee? Senator Gad.
Just a comment, complaining about the pilferage of the Senate staff by the newly established Department of Energy.
Oh, trust me, the first time I was up on the first time I called Deb Vanderbeek afterwards, Senate Chief of Staff, all I heard is, "You're banned, you're banned, you're banned." So, completely understood, Senator Guy, and thank you for your consideration.
And our regards to Griffin.
We will. I will.
Thank you very much. See no
Thank
further
you, Senator.
testimony. Is anybody in the audience care to speak on this behalf? On anything? On this bill? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing. And Senator Gatta, you have the floor so I can introduce my bill. Is Rainey here? Okay, great. All right.
We're actually a couple minutes early.
Oh, we're a couple minutes early?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have to wait till 9:30.
All right, give it 4 more minutes and we'll get started on this. All right. He's gonna talk about it.
With the goals.
It being 9:30, we'll call the hearing open for Senate Bill 346 FNA and recognize the prime sponsor, Senator Avard.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. For the record, I'm Senator Kevin Avard, District 12, and I'm here to introduce Senate Bill 346 FNA. Basically, it's requiring the Department of Environmental Services to conduct a feasibility study and impact studies for the construction of a pier at Hampton Beach. Now, we had a study committee, and this was part of it. This is the result of it, and we had come up with a figure of, say, about 20,000, but it looks like we may have to bump that up from 75 to 125,000 for a feasibility study. But it's a great idea, and I hope you support it.
Are there any questions from members of the committee? Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So are you going to have an amendment with a new amount, or?
Depending upon, what we decide, yeah, but yeah, if we can agree on it, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Further questions from the committee? Hearing none. Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Senator Avard.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Rainey Pelletier, the Assistant Director of the Water Division at DES. So I think you and I always have difficult time touching bases, but I did forward you a copy of the letter. As you know, I participated in meetings we had this summer. I think everybody in the room thought that this was something that was certainly warranted and could be needed. I think initially we had chatted about thinking about the Army Corps jetty, and everybody kind of ruled that out. Everybody, in fact, thought that a feasibility study would be prudent to determine where along the coastline that something of this nature could be feasible. I have since talked with Phil Bryce at DNC. I didn't want him to think I was throwing him under the bus when I suggested that they help participate in this project, but I did do some homework with Appledore Engineering, who does a lot of the coastal work, design work. They do a lot of the port and harbors designs. Appledore Engineering out of Portsmouth. They do a lot of coastal work. And I did talk about them, and in the letter of testimonies, you'll see that's where I identified somewhere in the 75 to 125 range that would be possible for that. I think historically we've seen in projects, whatever they are, land-based, that usually 10 or 20% of the cost of the project is what the engineering costs are, so that remains to be seen, but make it very clear the DES is fully in support of this. I think it would be a nice feature to have on the coast. As my letter of testimony identifies, I really don't have the staff that have the technical expertise to do this kind of work. We would certainly be more than willing to sit in and participate in the designs and see what's permittable under the Wetlands 482A statute, but the long and the short of it is we support the bill. We don't feel that we're the right agency that should oversee this kind of project just because of lack of technical expertise, but more than willing to participate, even if it's a joint agency effort. We certainly are more than willing to participate and hopefully get this project so it's at least the beginning stage in the feasibility part. And that's really the long and the short of my testimony. I didn't want to read the testimonial letter, but
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Rainey.
you're welcome.
Is Senator Sherman in here?
You and I should
don't- Okay, no. John Wyman?
Mr. Chairman and committee members, for the record, my name is John Nyan, the president of the Hampton Area Chamber of Commerce. I appreciate the opportunity to come in front of you today to speak in support of conducting a feasibility and impact study for the construction of the pier on Hampton Beach. Back in October, when I first met with some of you, I had shared my ideas of having a fishing pier on Hampton Beach right south of Boar's Head rather than the mouth of the river. So I'm happy to see that the bill reflects the change in location. I believe the business community along Hampton Beach, which represents close to 200 members of the chamber, would be very interested in supporting a study, as we did many years ago when we supported the Hampton Beach State Parks redevelopment study that turned into a newly developed state park in 2012. Trying not to duplicate what others have said or will say, I will make my comments brief and to the point. If DES is not interested, or as an alternative to DES, to be the lead on this study, then I would suggest that the bill be amended to direct the Hampton Beach Area Commission to be responsible for conducting the study. As a state-approved commission, they have the ability to take on projects like this, and also has the authority to accept and disperse funds, both public and private funds. Regarding the funding, as it was already indicated, the $20,000 amount seemed to be low, and what I would just ask is that we would be very willing to work with all parties involved in doing any further cost research and then return back to the committee with any recommendations. Both the Chamber and the Hampton Beach Village District are constantly looking for ways to improve the outdoor recreational activities for both our residents and visitors along the beach, and this would be a great enhancement in doing that. Although there are many questions still to be answered before taking the idea from concept to reality, the approval of this bill with amendments would be a great start. Once again, I thank you for the opportunity to speak on this bill, and let me commit that if this committee comes up with next steps, including action items, I would be happy to be involved. I have provided written testimony and also 2 pictures, one of where the location would be as we would propose it to be, and then 1 picture of a fishing dock, which I pulled from Google, that kind of looks like Hampton Beach. So with that, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for your testimony. So I know you're a Chamber of Commerce and not the municipality, but in terms of this potential location, was your sense that it'd be handicap accessible parking that would be adjacent to this?
Yes, Senator. There is, right across the street, there is state parks parking, and at any location of the parking, handicap accessible is not only available but free.
Thank you.
Free is good. Wonderful. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. Senator Stiles?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members.
Welcome, and it's good to see you.
For the record, I am Nancy Stiles, so I have taken off my other attire. And I represent the Hampton Beach Area Commission. I am the chair of that commission. That commission was formed by this legislature, and it includes 2 members of the town, 2 members of the village district, the Rockingham Planning Commission, the business community, and state parks and the DOT, as well as a member at large. So it's a very inclusive advisory committee. And with their permission, I am speaking on behalf of them. We fully support the idea of having a feasibility and impact study done. I'm guessing that this came out of your study committee last year. And one of the things that I just hope that the study won't lose sight of is the fact that it was thought for to make sure it was inclusive of the walking disabled. Please don't lose sight of that in the study. The responsibility of maintenance needs to also be clarified in that impact, so that people know who is going to be taking care of that after the fact. We love the beach. It's really booming since you've done a lot of changes down there. And
I think you helped with that.
a little.
Yeah.
I'm here to answer any questions that you might have of the commission.
Any questions for Senator Stiles? Seeing none.
There'll be plenty of questions, I'm sure, coming up. So
Thank you very much, and thank you for your testimony and
Thank
for
you.
your service. Rep. Pearl, I don't know, did you want to testify or not? No? Okay. Rep. Susan Smith? No, thank you. Okay. Philip Bryce? Division of
Parks and Recreation.
Park and Rec, okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, my fingers were cold from walking to
That's,
write very well.
you're welcome.
Good, may I start?
Yes, you may.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Philip Bryce. I'm Director of the Division of Parks and Recreation in the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. Please accept this testimony. I have copies here which I will provide. On behalf of our agency, as you look to this opportunity to continue to improve access for all people for the enjoyment of our natural resources, we ask you consider the following. We are uncertain who the best entity would be to oversee the study. The study committee may want to consider having the Hampton Beach Area Commission oversee the study, as has been mentioned before. That I provided the statutory reference to 16J1, and they assist the town and the state in long-range planning for Hampton Beach. And one of the important things they have about it, as was mentioned, is they have a good representation of the community and the state on that commission. Other agencies also, I'd point out other agencies you may want to also look to, including the Pease Development Authority's Ports and Harbors, who has piers, and the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department if fishing access is one of the purposes. There is a pier that was, I think, just constructed down in Massachusetts we looked into, and it was overseen by Fish and Game Department. That's who it was for fishing purposes. So understanding that one of the primary drivers here is accessibility. We assume that a consultant would be hired to conduct the study who has the expertise in this area. However, as was mentioned by DES, $20,000 isn't going to go very far. The pier in Mass, our understanding, I don't have a sense of scale or scope, but it was, I think, over $1 million. And as was mentioned, it's at least 10% to do any sort of engineering studies because, you know, I think to really understand putting a pier in the ocean out there would require some engineering work. We estimate 10%, so the numbers that were provided by DES are much more realistic. Understanding the impact on and the degree of support from the community, local law enforcement, and emergency services, because that presents some new challenges for them. We estimate 100,000 people on the beach in the summer at a time. And we have wonderful relationship and support with the community to make sure those people have a safe time. And then, of course, the abutters to the pier.
would be important, the neighbors there that are on Boar's Head, depending on the exact location, of course. Whoever would be responsible for managing the pier would likely want to understand any operating costs, including repair and maintenance for the lifespan of the pier, and then future replacement costs and the revenue sources to support those costs. We certainly, I think, as pointed out, this pier would be a wonderful amenity to the experience of visitors. Certainly in the main part of the season, we don't expect, only roughly out of 50 to 100,000 people on the beach, probably 4,000 people, maybe more, that are there actually paying state park the cost of being there for our lifeguards and everything else. So it'd be important to, we don't expect, because our lots are pretty full, because they have best access to the beach, that we generate much more revenue in the summertime in the parks as a result of this. And as we know, the handicap spots are free. However, we probably would receive some additional revenue in the shoulder seasons, because it would be an additional amenity, especially for fishing and just enjoying the beach in the off season. So we supported the study committee. This is a wonderful opportunity to enhance recreational experience out there. It's one of the best beaches in the U.S. And so, I thank you for the chance to provide this testimony, and I'd be glad to answer any questions or provide further information. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Phil, for coming out. My question drives a little bit more towards these future costs of maintenance and so forth. Do you anticipate that the town or the commission or whatever would establish a fee for the use of the pier for users to pay, as I've seen in other states where they have an ocean pier that's funded in part by fees charged to those who use it?
Yeah, the model for Hampton Beach has been to pay for parks, services that parks provide. The revenue sources that support all of the services provided to visitors are paid by the parking meters, and of course for the town it comes from the additional tax revenue from to pay for police and fire from the businesses that are along the Ocean Boulevard there. The problem with charging, we charge parking fees at the seacoast because our understanding, I was told that your liability increases if you charge like an access fee, like our day use fees, like at Sunapee or Wellington or wherever it might be. We charge day use fees there, but at the seacoast, it's a parking fee because of you have additional liability and responsibility for the user. That's what we've been told. And also, there is sort of the general, once you pay your parking fee, you get to, you sort of get to enjoy the beach. There's no coming and going and paying to get into this part of the beach, the town portion of the beach, and then paying to get into the state portion. So it flows much better. Certainly, though, the depending on what the costs of operating the pier are, you would want to look at what are other piers and what do they cost to maintain over time. And I would suggest that if you've been out, some of you are from the area, but the Army Corps put those huge blocks in on the jetty. Ocean just moved them around, so it's a force to deal with there at that location along the beach. So I'm concerned that you build a pier and then you end up having significant maintenance costs to maintain the integrity of the structure.
Is it possible that being at Boar's Head, that there's a little bit more protection from Boar's Head? From whereas where the jetty is, I mean, you get.
Oh yeah. I mentioned that to my staff, and they weren't sure they could say that, because if you get something coming out of the southeast, it could be substantial. It's a winter storm out of the southeast. But I had the same hypothesis, that it's protected by Boar's Head, and therefore it might be less exposed than the jetty. I think that's a great question, and hopefully that's correct.
But there are other states like Maine and South Carolina. They all have piers, and they seem to weather they figured it out, how to maintain it. So.
Yes, they do. So matching the conditions at Hampton with some of the other states that have piers would be very important part of the study, which is why we wanted to make sure it had adequate funding in order to be able to answer that question.
With specific, John, is there a possibility, and I'm just going to talk just behind you, was there an idea that maybe there'd be the area commission would be part of maintaining the pier as well? State, local kind of relationship as far as maintenance?
Mr. Chairman, that would be a question that the Senator Stiles would be able to answer, but I think that there's a number of potential alternatives to be able to fund on the maintenance of the pier after the construction, which I also believe there could be a good example of a public-private partnership also with the local community at the beach.
Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So do you have the amendment in front of you?
No, I don't.
I mean, the
didn't
bill,
grab-
excuse me.
Pardon?
Do you have the bill in front of you?
I have the bill in front of me, yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I misspoke there. So I guess what I'm just trying to get at what you were suggesting about who is going to do this. And if you look on line 2 there, you know, would it make sense to say the Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Studies shall study or designate an entity to study? Is that what you're suggesting?
I would suggest that you consider just assigning it to the Hampton Beach Area Commission, and because they have a statutory standing, they are an entity that that can be assigned this kind of project.
Okay. And then secondly, thank you, and if I may follow up,
Yep.
Mr. Chairman. So, and then secondly, based on the previous conversation, would it make sense to insert on line 2 after constructing the words "and maintaining a pier," so that the study would be an opportunity to look at the maintenance issues and perhaps develop a plan?
That would be very helpful.
Okay. And is it, in your opinion, are we talking about 150,000? Is that the ballpark figure?
Well, 10% of $1 million is 100,000, and as DES, it could be between 100 and 200,000.
Yeah.
So,
And then one final one. Based on the earlier conversation about the impacts there of the ocean, I mean, would it be fair to say that based on the work of the commission, other groups in there, and you know, Senator Stiles, of course, that there's really an understanding that the design here is going to have to take into account sea level rise, storm surge, you know, future conditions as well as current conditions, so that this might be a good opportunity for engineering study to look at, you know, best practices now to deal with those kinds of things in the future.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, right on the mark. I completely agree with that.
Thank you.
Needs to look at present and the future.
Thank you very much. Any
Oh.
further questions? Seeing
Okay,
none.
thank you very much.
Senator Sherman. Did you call each other?
Coordinated.
Welcome, Senator.
Thank you. For the record, Senator Tom Sherman, District 24, which includes the spectacular town of Hampton, New Hampshire. I apologize for being late. I was introducing bills over in education. So I don't know what other people have said. I'm sure they've covered most of this. I'd just like to make a couple of points. One is that we are very aware of making beach and beach facilities more accessible for those who are disabled. And this is something that we discussed at the committee, and I think this pier would really get people out on the water, which is, you know, it would be a spectacular outcome. We did look in depth under Senator Avard's leadership. We looked in depth at the original options of putting this on the jetty and others. And the benefit of putting it in the location that we've talked about over by Boar's Head is really the protection from the nor'easters, which, as all of us who've lived on the seacoast understand, are the ones that take big boulders and throw them up on the roads. So that location would actually provide ample protection. The storms, my understanding is that storms that would come out of the southeast are typically less fierce, except potentially hurricanes. But this kind of pier, you'll find it up and down the East Coast. And of course, if you go out to the West Coast, you'll find these piers going right out in the middle of nothing, just a long beach and then a pier going out in the Pacific Ocean. So it's clear that they can be designed in a sustainable fashion with that they are also ADA accessible. They, in terms of recreational use, it would be amazing. It'd be a place where people could go fishing and do other things, which you see out on the West Coast on these piers. But the other part that came up at the committee that I thought was really important is safety. Being able to have, we have new personal watercraft for our lifeguards and staff at the parks, and being able to put them out on the end of the pier, especially during rough weather, being able to get out past the breakers would be an important aspect to this, so that they wouldn't have to go through the breakers to be able to access someone in distress. And there was, and the final point, and Senator Stiles may be able to speak to this in more depth than I can, although I'm on the Public Advisory Council for the all the work that's being looked at by DOT looking at Ocean Boulevard. The timing is actually really good. We're right in the middle of a complete rethinking of the Ocean Boulevard corridor and how this would dovetail into that. If you wait a few years and then try to attach this to that part of Ocean Boulevard, you may be looking at a disaster. But if the planning is coordinated, it could be synergistic. So I think the timing is really good. I don't know if this is a great long-term idea. I think it has a lot of potential, and a study is exactly what I believe is needed and what the committee believed was needed under Senator Avart's leadership. So I hope you will look favorably on this.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Waters.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator, I don't, you may not know this off the top of your head, but is the Ocean Boulevard work part of the 10-year highway plan?
I believe it is. I know that, I'd have to check, but I'm pretty confident it is part of the 10-year highway plan.
And would you know what the years are?
No, but Senator Stiles may know.
Senator Stiles?
All right. So if I may just comment, or say Senator Sherman and Senator Stiles and others that we'll have the 10-year plan in hand in Senate Transportation this spring, and wouldn't it be the possibility to see something about funding parts of this?
Yeah, I think that's
included in the Ocean Boulevard funding.
A wonderful thought.
Senator, thank you. When we had our study committee, wasn't there a reflection on the cost benefit of all the updates done to Hampton Beach? Wasn't there a cost benefit that we discussed? Would there be, in your opinion, a cost benefit for this as well?
I believe this, if the studies show that this is number one feasible, number two sustainable, the cost benefit would be enormous. The seashell, the work that Senator Stiles did to basically do a complete makeover of the Hampton Beach appearance has brought in more tourism, more usage, and that's a major part of the mission of state parks is, and I'm not saying they would be the ones responsible for this, but we do what we can. I'm on the State Parks Advisory Council along with John, and one of the mission is this being a place to come to recreate and to be outdoors, and this would be a major attraction. Just one of the things that we've done in Hampton is, if you look at the new bridge that's going to go in from Hampton to Seabrook, in a little bit in jest, during the advisory council, the public advisory council, I talked about putting bump outs on that bridge like you'd have in the Seine in Paris, so that people could stop when they're walking over and admire the view. And that's part of the design. They are doing that. And I think every time we put in something that recognizes a structure that you might think of as just being a functional structure, as being something where people can actually enjoy it, and it becomes, in itself, it becomes the actual attraction. That is an amazing opportunity. And so, yes, I think this will be an attraction. I think it'll be an attraction like many of the other piers. I was just out in Santa Monica and enjoying that trip. That is a massive pier. I don't see us having an amusement park on this one, but the idea of being able to access the water without having to get in it is, I think, going to be a huge attraction. And there's nothing like this on the New Hampshire coast.
Thank you. Further questions? John, you want to add something to this? Yes.
Mr. Chairman. When we talked back in October, I threw out some, what I believe are believable facts. With the redevelopment of the state park, we had Dr. Goss involved in that study, because when we went to the House and the Senate and the Governor, we focused on return on investment. And return on investment, I think, is very, very important for the state when they committed $14.5 million. And I can almost tell you firsthand that that $14.5 million has already been paid through state and local taxes. The other aspect that I think is really critical is that since the development of the state park, across the street in the private industry, there's been over $175 million invested in either new construction or reconstruction. So there is that return on investment for the state to seriously look at this as, once again, an additional enhancement that will generate revenue to the state of New Hampshire.
Great. Any questions from the committee? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sherman. Rep. Joyce Weston, I don't know if you want to talk or not. No, thank you. All right. But you are in support. Does anybody else want to add any comments? Seeing none, I think that's it for this particular bill, so we'll close the hearing on that. I know where my, there you go.
Yeah,
Now
I was
it's
going to ask
official.
you. Thank you. You read my mind.
All right, so we got enough time? All right, good. We'll hear from the sponsor of SB 267 FNA. The chair recognizes Senator Gaida.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Bob Gaida, Senate District 2, and prime sponsor of Senate Bill 267 FNA. The genesis of this bill was traveling around the state last summer and noticing the proliferation of Japanese knotweed and what I consider to be even a greater threat to our arboreal resources, and that would be the bittersweet invasive species. I began doing some research and found that the totality of our invasive species efforts is focused in a small part of the Department of Transportation, which deals only, however, with those areas along our highways and access ramps, leaving the rest of the state without any coordinated program to control these things, which are very, very quickly growing and taking over entire forests. They will kill an entire forest in a matter of years, the bittersweet specifically, as well as the hazards presented by the Japanese knotweed that encroach on roads, block signs, and so forth, and including drainage problems that they cause. So I did some research. Of course, the Department of Environmental Services has a very well-coordinated aquatic invasive species program that we fund, and they fund as well with other sources. which does a good job at trying to mitigate milfoil and other invasive species in the water, but we have no such statewide comprehensive program to look at invasive species on land. And so that's the genesis of this bill. What we do is we establish within the Department of Agriculture, Markets, and Foods an invasive species coordinator. This person, as you can read in the bill, is basically an overseer of finding out where these invasive species are and coordinating with local communities. It does require each community to designate, no cost, just to designate a contact person so that our state coordinator can begin to assess and work with the local communities to try to address this town by town. Also required to coordinate with DES and DNCR, so forth, to make sure that anything that might be done by this state coordinator or any of the towns that'll actually be the implementers of the policies doesn't conflict with the existing requirements or concerns of those departments. We fund $150,000. That's non-lapsing, and we fund it by the end of this biennium. I'd say by the end of June of 22, and it carries forth. That money to be used to initial setup, and then we establish the fund, the Invasive Species Fund, that will receive donations and be funded, we would hope, in the state budget, so that we can continue this program moving forward. Again, I think that we do need a coordinating person for the state that can look at the totality of the picture and present us with the needs that we have so we can adequately address the rapidly growing problem of the invasive species on land, the upland invasive species. I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Perkins Cuoca.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. And just 2 questions for you. I think this is obviously a good program to have in place, so I appreciate the work. It might be helpful to add a definition of invasive species, and I didn't know if you had considered doing that and drafting it.
Yeah, I think they're already defined in federal statute.
Okay.
Some are aquatic are defined in, under DES. Certainly we can put, I wouldn't want to make it exclusive. It would certainly be bittersweet and then the Japanese knotweed and others. So I'm certainly amenable to that, just to define that.
Okay, and there's just a follow-up. Thank you for clarifying what the request is of municipalities. I see from the structure of the bill that there's no specific ask other than for the towns and cities to designate a contact and then to cooperate. My fear is that, like duties related to water or other things, that the responsibilities could grow and then it becomes kind of a demand on our towns and cities. Do you have any thoughts about how to sort of manage that proactively? Is the idea that the coordinator will do a lot of the on-the-ground work, or how will that kind of play out?
I think a large part of the coordinator's job, which frankly already exists de facto with one of the employees in agriculture, markets, and foods, but is not specifically identified. He does it as an adjunct at his own time, so to speak. I think that by definition, a coordinator, he doesn't have the ability to mandate anything. He works with the towns and the communities to help them, get educated on it, to help them get certified to deal with it if they like, and as we outlined in the bill, to establish the state as a clearinghouse for whatever. It's important to note as well, I need to give credence to Representative Suzanne Smith, who's worked with me on this, that we will be bringing an amendment to clarify that what we want to do first is not get into the chemical part, to try natural remediation. There may be species that are, controlling of these other invasive species, but do that part of it rather than go right into using chemicals and those types of things. And there'll be an amendment coming forward. And Suzanne, Representative Smith may wish to speak on that, and I'm happy to ask the committee to let her do so. Any other questions?
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you for your time.
Commissioner Jasper, are you here on this bill?
I am. I apologize. I guess I've gotten very rusty. I just realized I had failed to sign up.
You did, but I recognize you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, I am Sean Jasper, Commissioner of the New Hampshire Department of Agriculture, Markets, and Foods. I am here in support of the bill, and I want to thank Senator Gaida and all the sponsors for their work on this. This was actually a priority of mine when I became commissioner and was really starting to work towards doing something similar to this when the pandemic hit, and all the priorities I had went by the wayside. And the senator approached us relative to this, and he worked closely with us in developing this bill, and we are in full support of it. I know that you have a letter from New Hampshire Fish and Game relative to clarifying that we're not talking about invasive animal life, and I assured Director Mason that we did not want to deal with his feral pigs, and that we would be in full support of any amendment that would clarify that this is only really dealing with plant life. And I'd be glad to work with anybody on an amendment to make that clarification should you decide to move forward. But you know, certainly if you have been down around the Hartford, Connecticut area, you can see what New Hampshire could easily become if we don't get our hands around this. That's a jungle down there. It's killing all the native trees with everything that is just wrapping itself around it. We're doing what we can, and we need to do more, and at least start with this to have a dedicated program. We know that DOT has been very good at working with us. Many communities have as well, but there is a lack of coordination. So this would be a great start. We would never intend to mandate any community do anything. I think that does become a constitutional issue under 28A anyhow. And so without providing funds, that should not be a worry. But there are many communities, I think, that would like to do more, but they lack the expertise which this program could help provide. So with that, I'll close my testimony and take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Commissioner. I know that the Senator talked about but there's a plant down in the Nashua area, a tree, that just seems to...
Personally familiar with it. I haven't seen one, but I know that...
they grow like weeds.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, so any of those...
would be included in...
gigantic pile of invasives, because you can't just leave them there like weeds that you pull up and leave on the ground, because they just take root and take over again. And I didn't even mention knotweed, but here's the photos of our town forest cleanup day. You can pass them around. So
anyway, you can send that to one of the bioplants so we can generate energy out of that?
quite possibly. I also chair the aquatic invasive weeds and species program, and one of our former members made wine out of milfoil.
Oh, interesting.
So
no, thank you.
I haven't tasted it, but I can take any questions you have.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions on the amendment at all? Any chance? Or on the bill as a whole? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Rep. Pearl, you don't want to speak on this? Patrick? Is it Patrick Hackley, Director of... Did I get that right?
You did.
All right.
Not bad.
So I'm going to always blame anything on misspelling or miscommunication on my glasses.
Right.
I know I'm used to them now. But welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. And thanks for the opportunity to testify in SB 267. For the record, my name is Patrick Hackley, and I'm the Director of the Division of Forests and Lands under the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. We don't have a formal position one way or the other on this, but invasive species is a critical issue for us in the forest health, forest management of our state's resources, and also in helping private landowners manage their forests responsibly. What I'm going to read you is basically an excerpt from the 2020 Forest Action Plan. So it's not too long. For those of you who haven't read the full 268-page Forest Action Plan, I'm going to spare you and just read you the section on invasive plants and how we consider them to be a very serious issue for the state. Just a little bit of background. The Division of Forests and Lands is a state agency charged with the execution of all matters pertaining to forestry, forest management, and forest lands within the jurisdiction of the state. One of the division's key responsibilities is to manage the negative impacts on forest health through suppression, quarantine, management, pest monitoring and research, evaluation, and outreach to private forest landowners to effect mitigation strategies. Our forest health sections work in cooperation with the Department of Agriculture, Markets and Food in the control of forest-related pests, including invasive species, plant species. If you take nothing else away from my testimony this morning, there's a couple of sentences here, and this is one of them. Non-native invasive species have become an overwhelming problem in New Hampshire, affecting our natural environment and also managed landscapes. Invasive species often possess certain traits that give them an advantage over most native species. As Senator Smith just mentioned, the most common traits include high productivity, early and rapid development, adaptability and tolerance of a broad range of environmental conditions, and the lack of natural controls. These combined traits allow certain non-native species, such as Oriental bittersweet, Japanese barberry, there's a host of others that we have actually listed in our Forest Action Plan. They become highly competitive and dominant in our forests, fields, and uplands. In some instances, species such as Norway maple or tree of heaven, which was mentioned earlier, rely on their ability to excrete toxic chemicals from their roots, which interferes with or prevents the establishment of native species within its rooting zone. Furthermore, studies have shown that invasives can reduce natural diversity, impact endangered or threatened species, reduce wildlife habitat, create water quality impacts, stress and reduce forest and agricultural crop production, damage personal property, and cause health problems. Within the United States, the adverse economic impacts resulting from invasive species currently exceeds $100 billion annually. Unfortunately, New Hampshire is not immune. Every community in the state is impacted by at least one invasive plant, and as the number of invasives grow, so does the potential for greater dispersions, native species displacement, and negative ecological consequences. Several disruptive plants already exist in New Hampshire and are here to stay. Therefore, we need to focus our efforts on slowing the spread to new locations and be diligent about our best management practices that provide an opportunity for native species to compete. These strategies are particularly important now because it is anticipated that climate change may exacerbate the detrimental effects or impacts of invasive plants by facilitating migration of new non-native species into New Hampshire that are not yet present or currently very limited. So we're trying to, this program is also not just about detecting and eradicating existing, but keeping an eye on future plants that are coming our way. And as Commissioner Jasper mentioned, it's not just Hartford, Connecticut. You can drive right up the I-95 core and you can see it in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, and that's just the highway population that we're noticing, of course. So these are in our forests right now, in our natural forests and fields. There are many invasive species emerging as threats to our forests, as I mentioned, Norway maple and tree of heaven, to go along with other invasive plants spreading close to New Hampshire, like kudzu, which many of you have already heard of. That's a southern vine that's kind of like the southern version of bittersweet. And giant hogweed, which has an absolutely toxic reaction when its sap or its liquid gets on the skin, reacts with sunlight and causes severe blistering to the skin. So it's quite a nasty plant, actually. It's called giant hogweed. The list of invasive grasses and sedges also continue to grow as more seed is accidentally spread by recreationists, wildlife, construction, forestry, unfortunately, and weather events, hurricanes blowing seed. Strategies to slow the spread of invasive species need to focus on prevention, public education, and local control. And that's why I think it's very good to see the outreach to the municipalities in this bill, which is really where it needs to start, actually. It is critical that people understand their role in creating the problem through landscape plantings, recreational activities, poor vegetative management, and lack of knowledge. So SB 267, if passed into law, would establish an invasive species coordinator, really formalize the position. As Senator Gaida said, it's been an informal kind of the work's being done to a certain extent, but it hasn't been formalized or truly supported in the position that's being proposed in this bill. So such a position, this invasive species coordinator position within Department of Agriculture, Markets and Food, will effectively address the state's invasive species crisis and carry out the existing statewide strategy plan that actually exists now, which will focus on evaluating and listing invasive species, outreach, and education. It will assist municipalities in identifying invasive species and provide guidance on best management practices for prevention, mitigation, and eradication where possible using integrated vegetative management, which, as was mentioned earlier by other speakers, is not just about herbicides. It's not just about chemicals. Where it's possible, you can remove a startup non-invasive plant manually. It does take a lot of work, as was mentioned, sometimes tractors and a gang of people, but there are other ways besides chemicals. But in some cases, chemicals are the only solution given the extensive spread of some of these species. The bill will also promote coordination among state agencies such as mine, as well as UNH Cooperative Extension to provide workshops to private landowners and how they can address invasive species on their lands. And most of all, it'll provide, as Senator Gotti mentioned, this upland invasive species remediation fund to support efforts to detect and minimize the spread of invasives throughout the state. That's the gist of my comments. I'm happy to take any questions if you'd like.
Questions from the committee? Senator Gotti.
Yeah, Patrick, thank you for joining us today. Does DNCR have a list, following on an earlier question from the committee, of specific plants that would be incorporated into this as a minimum in terms, and others as the list grows or changes?
Yeah, we have a list in our forest action plan actually that I can excerpt and send to you, Senator Gotti. But we have a botanist, Bill Nichols, on our staff with the Natural Heritage Bureau. He works closely with Doug on the Invasive Species Committee, as you may recall. We had a conversation about that. So they're not only have identified basically all the culprits that are now in the state, but are also looking on the horizon for future ones. So I'm happy to provide that list if that's what you're requesting.
Follow up. It might be more prudent just to refer to the invasive species list maintained by DNCR.
Yes.
Rather than have to change it statutorily.
Okay, yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that would make sense.
That makes good sense.
Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Make sure I don't have any state reps here first. Robert Johnson? Matt? Oh, okay. Robert, welcome. How you doing?
Good, thank you, Mr. Chair, members
very
of the
welcome.
committee. For the record, Rob Johnson, representing the New Hampshire Farm Bureau, is the Federation's policy director, and we are in strong support of the bill. I apologize, I haven't heard any of the testimony, but I just wanted to say that it is something, invasive species are, I would say, a major problem for New Hampshire agriculture and forestry as well. It's something our members deal with regularly, and the way the bill's drawn, it puts more, the top, as you're aware, does work now, but this is a little more focus, more resources, and again, we're in strong support, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you for your pithy comments, and we appreciate it. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, well done. Matt?
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm, for the record, I'm Matt Leahy. I'm the Public Policy Director for the Forest Society. We support this legislation. I will be brief. And we actually think it's extremely important legislation. So I just want to thank
when dealing with invasive species. So please vote yes on Senate Bill 267. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Integrated what?
Integrated pest management or integrated vegetation management. And I did send a link to those two definitions in a email that I sent yesterday. So that will provide you a little more information. But that's using different techniques that don't involve, pesticides and chemical controls.
Thank you, Senator Perkins, Cuoca.
Yeah, that almost exactly was my question, but just to take it a step further, how would you incorporate a recommendation for these to be the primary method? Because I know in Portsmouth, glyphosate has been a big issue.
I'll represent District 17, and I am the ranking member of the House Environment and Agriculture Committee. And I am a co-sponsor of this bill. I support the intent entirely. I also have some reservations, most of which are line up with what Representative Pearl mentioned. One other issue that I'm not sure is entirely addressed in the bill is there is, when you're looking at a breeder, that breeder is sometimes the animals that are the breeding stock are also essentially family pets of the breeder, and I want to make sure that that the language is set up in such a way that you wouldn't end up taking away the family pets in the process of dealing with the animals that are inconsistent with now that the license has been revoked, that would be inconsistent with that situation. The commissioner thinks that he has language in there that may be sufficient to cover that. I would I haven't investigated it thoroughly enough to be convinced either way on that, but I would urge you that you take a little bit of a look at that too. And with that, I'd be happy to take questions, but I think that the answers are probably with other people behind me.
All right. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Representative. Angela?
Good
Welcome.
morning. Good morning. I do have copies of my testimony. Thank you. All right. I am here on behalf of dog owners of the Granite State. We are an American Kennel Club affiliated nonprofit organization that was founded back in 1991, just to give you a little background on us. And we represent interests of all pet owners. Our membership includes a vibrant and active community of specialty breed clubs, all breed kennel clubs, dog and cat breeders, veterinarians, mushers, hunters, and livestock guardian dog owners. Regarding SB 368FN, we feel that this bill has been driven by a pretty rare situation that happens with a pet vendor who's unwilling to comply with addressing issues to their facility, maybe identified during an inspection when they would be getting their license renewed. The health of the animals is not in question, therefore not warranting animal cruelty charges, which would be covered under our current law. And that would result potentially in the seizure of animals. Rather than having to use a bill such as this to go in and take animals without any animal cruelty charges being in place. We understand and are sympathetic to the department, although we cannot support the bill just to punish one bad actor and potentially put others at risk. We feel that there's a lack of local police involvement, and enforcing current law is really the real issue here. Or maybe there's no local laws that are being broken, such as the number of animals not violating zoning laws or ordinances, or barking in excess of statutory limits. This, in conjunction with the inability to charge for animal cruelty, since the animals are healthy, it seems the only law being broken is transferring animals without a license. We also have laws on the books to enforce penalties, including charges of a misdemeanor and a $1,000 fine per violation, which would be for each transfer. So example, any puppy that's sold over the threshold that requires you to become a pet vendor, you would be charged $1,000 per puppy. So that could actually equal some pretty steep fines for somebody who is a pet vendor and actively breeding and selling, as well as being charged with a misdemeanor. We feel that these are steep penalties which ought to incentivize making the necessary changes to the facility and getting the license reinstated. And I think in the majority of cases, that's going to be enough to get the work done. Sometimes there's going to be people who choose to ignore the work that needs to be done. And in those cases, it may be more than just non-compliance. Maybe they don't see due to some form of mental situation that might actually be going on. And I think in those cases, that's when social services should be pulled into the situation to see if there's more that can be done in other avenues to go forward. A lot of the issues with SB 368 come with the unintended consequences, seizure of property without due process, or even having a warrant to take property. Animals are considered property. Harsher penalties for the licensed versus those who avoid licensure. So if somebody is thinking about becoming a pet vendor because they're getting close to that threshold or would likely go over, they need to think about, do I want to take the risk of just paying fines and getting a misdemeanor or having all of my animals seized? And that could actually create some non-compliance with life due to the risk of either the forced transfer of their animals or the seizure of their animals. Breeders and other animal owners are very sensitive to the fact that somebody could come in and take their animals and disperse them how they see fit. That's something that they face a lot nowadays with different cases that have happened. We've even had cases in New Hampshire that were overturned because animals were seized and there wasn't actually enough evidence to hold the charges. The animals were returned to the breeder. And I can definitely get you information on that case if it's something that you did. Some additional unintended consequences of this bill are the potential of spreading disease by rapidly dispersing animals. It's possible that a license could be revoked because somebody did sell an animal that was sick. With this bill, if they didn't resolve the issues and get their license reinstated within the time frame, they could be forced to rapidly sell those animals to get them out of their facility or end up having them seized, and that could actually put disease out into our state. We talked about the fines. If they have to transfer their animals as part of this bill to avoid having them be seized, they could still incur the fines because they would be transferring without a license over the number of animals that are allowed to be transferred without a license. So there could be some fees that come into play just by trying to follow this new bill. Something else that's a concern as well is back when the transfer threshold was reduced from 50 down to 30 transfers of dogs, cats, etc., it's now very likely to include the small hobby breeders who work out of their homes. The rules which need to be followed to get and maintain a license, Agriculture 1700 Part 1704, apply to commercial facilities and not necessarily homes. So there's things such as walls being impervious to moisture that aren't typical in your standard home environment. So that makes the potential for license revocation much higher due to the inability to conform to the inspection rules. So without a new category for home breeders in rules, there's too much potential for unnecessary license revocation, forced transfer of animals, and ultimately animals being seized. So definitely something to consider if we need to do some work in rulemaking. And then animals shouldn't be confiscated for reasons other than cruelty or an issue that made their location unsafe for them to live in. So with that being said, I hope that you will vote this bill inexpedient to legislate, and I would be happy to take any questions.
Well done. Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none?
Thank you very much.
Stacy? Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Stacy Ober, and I am the legislative analyst and community outreach contact here in New England for the American Kennel Club. It is a 135-year-old not-for-profit organization that is a recognized expert in canine health, breeding, dog training. We represent more than 5,000 kennel clubs across the country, including 14 here in New Hampshire. And just to give you an appreciation of how popular our sports are, humans wanting to bond with their dog. In 2019, for instance, AKC licensed and sanctioned 141 events here in New Hampshire, in which more than 24,000 dogs participated. So we are a dog expert. I think you can appreciate from Angela's testimony before me on behalf of New Hampshire Dogs that we have been working very closely with the Senate and the House to get this right in the context of the pet vendor license changes that were adopted back in 2019. At that time, we had flagged some constitutional issues before this committee and Chairwoman Fuller Clark, and have thankfully been able in the last 2 years to address those issues because they were a negative consequence of the language not being thoughtfully thought through. So I am here today to say that the AKC is opposed to the bill as filed, but we're very interested in working with you and ensuring that we get the text right the first time around. And I've expressed that to Commissioner Jasper as well, and I'm grateful for his continuing dialogue with us. What I wanted to share is that AKC supports the right of people to own, train, interact with, and exhibit their dogs without interference. And we also support reasonable and enforceable laws that protect the welfare and health of dogs and do not restrict the rights of breeders and owners who take those responsibilities seriously. So we recognize that the department has expressed the need for this authority. They currently have civil administrative penalty authority, and the commissioner has expressed that in some instances those fines and that civil structure has not been adequate, which is why you see the bill before you that would allow the department in the instance where a pet vendor licensee is unable or unwilling to comply with the rules, has had their license revoked. The problem we have with the language and allowing the seizure of the animals is that we know the legislature takes the Constitution seriously, and under the Constitution, the seizure or search of private property by government is a constitutional issue. And so by virtue of granting the department this authority to seize animals, in addition to revoke the license, in our estimation, that falls into the bucket of criminal consequences. I did take a semester of constitutional law, but it was many years ago. I don't claim to be a constitutional law expert, but what I can do is flag legal issues. And so what I wanted to share is that, first of all, this bill, if it was adopted, could result in a harsher outcome for a pet vendor whose license is revoked than for someone charged with animal cruelty. And the reason we know that is that we've done significant work with the legislature back in 2019 and ongoing to address the animal cruelty statute and to ensure that it's constitutionally sound, which it is. We don't believe that this language before you in Senate 368 is either going to be effective or appropriate. And the reason I say effective is, let's say the department had a case where the license was revoked. They don't transfer their animals of their own volition. They go in and seize those animals. Nothing in this language would prevent that individual from going out and acquiring more animals and continuing to engage in the transfer of animals in an unlicensed capacity. Second, owners must be afforded substantive and procedural due process protections and must not be permanently or unreasonably deprived of property interests they have in their animals. The policies and procedures that I mentioned that are detailed in the animal cruelty laws are constitutionally sound regarding animal seizure, that procedure and process, and ought to be enforced when animals are not kept in a humane manner. So the seizure of personal property happens lawfully with a warrant, and departments in other states, for instance, do have the authority to go into court and request an injunction from the court, which would solve the problem of imposing on an individual that they can no longer function as a pet vendor in the state of New Hampshire because they're either unwilling or unable to comply with what those requirements are under the department. So I'm happy to be a resource to the committee. This is of great interest to us because, as I noted, we had issues with language that was adopted in the budget in 2019 that resulted in a good amount of emotional and financial toil, including one of our breeders of merit who sources dogs to law enforcement having to hire a lawyer because their negative outcome was related to a zoning issue and a taking of their property. So I just wanted to emphasize that and impress upon you our great desire and interest in working with you to make sure the language is right.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? If we wanted to go forward with this bill, what kind of language would you suggest to change?
Well, I have a copy with me of language in a Massachusetts statute, for instance, and I don't want to come across as minimizing the difficulty of enforcing these laws, because we see that in other states as well. But it's a surprise to me to learn that the department used to have authority that it no longer has and is now limited to just civil administrative fines. So I'd like to look at what that language was in New Hampshire statute that apparently was removed a few years ago, which I've not yet done. But I do think it would be appropriate to give the commissioner the tools to go into court and either request a warrant, demonstrate probable cause that the animals should be seized, and also, as I noted, to have the court's involvement with regard to issuing an injunction should that be appropriate. Someone had asked earlier the question about a license, and doesn't the revocation of the license by the state agency, isn't that sufficient? Because there will be an administrative hearing, for instance, and an opportunity to be heard with regard to the license to function as a pet vendor. Typically, under administrative law, professional licenses or business licenses are regarded as privilege. Your driver's license in the eyes of the law is considered a privilege. You may have a property interest in your license to practice medicine and to earn a livelihood, but in the end, that's a privilege, and that's the distinction. Private property, animals are personal property, so they're private property, and there's a different legal bar for the search and seizure of private property.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. Oh, Senator Gadd.
I would just like, I share the concerns about seizures of property for administrative failures. Our nation and our court systems are in a constant battle. I'm speaking as a former FBI agent. We operated under the premise of taking, search and seizure very, 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 very seriously. And it is always a moving ball, depending who is the Chief Justice and who forms the majority opinions. But as a rule, I think we are bound to protect the right against unreasonable search and seizure. And property such as a dog for an administrative failure, I think goes above the bar as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
And again, I can't overemphasize our respect and regard for the work the department is doing, and we do see the challenges in other states, and that it is incredibly challenging to have these issues be regarded a priority, have local law enforcement respond. Even states' attorney generals are very busy offices and have limited resources. So I don't mean to dismiss or undermine it, but I feel as though the language we're looking at in this bill sets a very dangerous precedent.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Commissioner Jasper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Again, I am still Sean Jasper and still the Commissioner of Agriculture. First of all, it has always been my assumption, and I could be wrong, I think legislative research can probably settle this issue. My understanding would be that any seizure of personal property and animals would always be something that could be appealed. It doesn't need to be put in every statute. Now, it is entirely possible that I'm wrong on that, but I do not believe that constitutionally we could seize an animal and not have an appeal process in place. I think that somebody always has the right to do that. I think we're all familiar with the Tina Fey case the Great Danes in Wolfboro. Those animals were seized for animal cruelty, and there was an appeal process that went on for quite some time. So certainly, if that was an issue, my intent would be that there would be an appeal process. We are in an untenable situation in the Department of Agriculture with this pet vending. First, it's not something that is really under our primary mission as a department. It was put on the department a number of years ago. If you could find somebody else who would like to have it, we would be more than happy to shed that off. If you would like to do away with pet vending altogether, we would be more than happy to have pet vending go away. But you have, as a legislature, have tasked us with a job, and you have not given us the tools to do it. We spin our wheels almost on a daily basis. We have no real enforcement. The police do. But we all know the police are very busy, and that this is a low priority for them. We have one person in particular, a couple who have been unlicensed for decades, and there's been virtually nothing we've been able to do about it. That person finally has been arrested twice this year, but is out on bail again after the first arrest in a court order of not to engage in pet vending through something like August from the first, or after that order, which was late in 20. Over 185 animals were transferred. We have testimony, or the police have testimony from individuals that yes, the person who was ordered not to engage in transfer of animals did engage, and yet those people are still in business. We have actually revoked very few pet vending licenses. I believe since I've been commissioner, there's been one that has been revoked, and that is always after a long period of attempting to work with people. The last thing that we want to do is put somebody out of business. It's been suggested, okay, well, you're a good commissioner, other people wouldn't do that. They might just go like that. I would suggest to you that if any commissioner started to just willy-nilly revoke licenses, that commissioner would find him or herself in front of the executive council and subject to being removed as a commissioner. That's not something that the state of New Hampshire takes lightly doing. Our first priority is to keep people licensed and in compliance with the laws and the rules of regulation. You've heard that it's possible that people would want to go unlicensed. That is always a possibility. I think it's very unlikely. I have asked people who have testified here today to show me anything in our rules which is unreasonable. We will work with anybody who comes in and say, your rules are unreasonable and here are the things that are unreasonable about them. Nobody's come forward with that. And obviously our rules go through a rulemaking process, and those issues could be brought out at that time, and they haven't been. So I think that's an argument that really doesn't hold up to much scrutiny. There are very few people who are at risk here, and it's very easy to stay in compliance. And if you're just following the rules, then just like having a driver's license, there are people who have suspended driver's license all the time. I don't think that encourages people not to have driver's license. Yet do we know there are people out there, every once in a while we'll read a story about somebody who finally got stopped after operating for 45 years without a driver's license. This is not a disincentive because our rules are not onerous. They're easy to follow. There are people who simply, for whatever reasons, can't seem to stay in compliance, and we need to have the ability to deal with that. Now, it's been suggested we call in mental health professionals in those cases. I don't have the authority to do that. I don't have the staff that has the training to determine whether somebody has mental health issues and should be subject to professional counseling. All we can do is look at the law. So we can't do anything to stop people who may decide to be unlicensed. We're dealing with people. You know, is this my ideal fix for everything? No. you know, those are police matters. We try very hard to deal with those. But I need to deal with the people who I'm licensing and the people who are licensed under the department. Going a little bit astray when we're dealing with the other areas, and I'm trying to stay focused on the people that we license. So the due process is a real issue. I think they already have the ability to appeal that. You know, so it's been suggested that this might be a health issue if we require people to get rid of their animals too quickly. They still would be required to have a health certificate. The veterinarian would still have to sign off on that. Is 30 days the right period of time? Maybe if you look at the fact that, you know, puppies can't be transferred for, I think, six weeks or 8 weeks. Maybe the 30-day period ought to be a longer period of time. I'm certainly amenable to that. But the reality is, from the time we even go into a hearing for a revocation, you know, there's a long period of time here. We're working on one now, and this person has, again, years and years of trying to work with the person, the license holder, and not getting any place. And it was all about the conditions of the in-house facility. We're still trying to work through that. And quite frankly, it was the attorney for that person who said to me, well, you pull her license, and then what's going to stop her from just continuing with the same animals? And that's very, very true. That's the issue. You know, now the police on a local level have to be tracking, you know, these issues and willing to take an action. We're hoping and we expect that the threat of actually the loss of the animals will bring people into compliance. Not that we're going to be seizing animals on this, because we'd much rather bring them into compliance. The fine at $1,000 an animal, you know, I haven't had a dog in a long time. The last time my family bought a dog, we paid $25 for a German Shepherd. I'm now seeing on a regular basis that these animals are transferring for $4,000 or more. So a $1,000 fine doesn't necessarily put somebody out of business. We've also heard that, you know, a hobby breeder, 30 animals at $4,000 an animal is $120,000. Do any of you have a hobby that brings you in over $100,000 a year? I think when you start getting to the point of even probably $50,000 a year, it's not a hobby. And so I really find that argument somewhat offensive, that it's a hobby at that level of activity. And I don't think you should take that part of it seriously. That's no longer a hobby. That's certainly a business when you're above 30 animals. Could somebody acquire more animals if we seized them and we were upheld? They certainly could. What could we ever do to stop that with anything? What can we ever do with anything in the law to stop people from future activity? Short of incarceration, really nothing. So all we can do is try to send a message, and isn't that what we do with all of our laws, is try to send a message for proper behavior, because we can't stop anything with our laws. We don't stop speeding, we don't stop drunk driving, we can't stop people from acquiring more animals short of a court order, which again, who's going to enforce that? So I'm just asking for some tools to be able to do the job that you, as legislators, have asked the department to do. We're drowning out here now. I mean, the number of man hours that we put into pet vending and trying to bring people into compliance is totally unreasonable. It takes up way too much of the divisions of animal industry's time. And we're just pleading with you to help us do that job which you've asked us to do, or take the job away from us and then I'll be very happy. I'll be the happiest commissioner in the state of New Hampshire.
You're not happy already?
I'm pretty happy most of the time, but anytime pet vending issues come up, I'm not happy in the least bit.
Thank you for your testimony, Commissioner. Are there any questions from the committee? You know, I know that we've had this debate in the House even years back on licensure and what is its purpose? And if you're going to license somebody, if you don't have enforcement, what good is it? And so what you're saying is that your ability to enforce is very limited, if at all possible.
And unfortunately, it's limited because we're dependent on a law enforcement agency taking the lead. We take it to the wall, and then somebody else has got to take it from there. And very often, they really don't have any interest. And I'm not blaming law enforcement. I am really not blaming them at all because of the issues they have to deal with. But that's our problem, is we don't have the ability to go any further.
If I understand correctly, once law enforcement was involved in one particular case, they had to house the dogs over a long period of time, and they did not have the funds to house these animals.
And that is why we put the cost of care fund in place that is being used. Granted, you know, a large case could take up a lot of resources. I will tell you that in most of the seizure cases, we work with the local police and the owner to have them surrender the animals. And that reduced, generally, part of it is they might have 25 animals that are being seized, and they'll end up in return for surrendering the animals. They will then have the number of animal cruelty charges against them reduced. And at that point, we work with a lot of agencies, a lot of organizations to find homes for those animals so that there is no cost. And so that is generally what happens. We do seize animals, and thankfully, I don't think we've been seizing too many lately. The first few years of my tenure, we were seeing more of that.
Mm-hmm.
But in most of those cases, those animals were surrendered, and there were not the cost. And so what we've been seeing, the drawdown on the cost of care fund has been minimal at this point.
If I recall, there was a case where, in essence, the housing of these animals could actually bankrupt a small town for the immediate care. It was literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so one case does matter because it could bankrupt a community. Am I wrong or correct?
Well, in this case, you know, certainly that could be a concern. But I don't think in that case, it's not the town's seizing under animal cruelty. It's essentially the state seizing the animals. And like anything, you know, sometimes we look at those details and say, all right, we need to look at this a little bit more closely to see the practical application of that. I mean, the reality of the situation, and we probably went a little beyond maybe what our authority was. We had a hearing on a revocation. We ended up with an agreement with the former license holder. He had a storefront. That's a much cleaner area because if you lose your license and you have a storefront, you're out of business. And so we worked with him, and he surrendered. He transferred all his animals. There was no seizure, but the end result in our agreement with him was going to be that the animals would be seized. But if you're in business and you're selling animals for, you know, $2,000 to $4,000 a piece, and you know they're going to have them seized, you're going to get rid of those animals to get your money back. And that's what happened in that case. Those animals all essentially were transferred, and there was no issue. Now, will that happen every time? No, but I think there's an awful lot of disincentive to sit there once you've lost your license and not transfer those animals, even if your intent is, well, I'm going to get some other ones and go back into business those that you have, why would you take the risk and spend all the money to get them back, where they may be personal property, but they're not pets?
Senator Gatter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple things. I think that a large part of the concern with the exorbitant costs was the exorbitant price being charged per day for the care of the dogs. I mean, let's put that blame where it belongs, okay? In your process, do you use administrative warrants?
We do not have that ability, no.
And I know that in other agencies, administrative search warrants are in fact a tool of law, in which a judge is then brought in and due process is through the courts presented that here's a violation, here's what we're seeing, and then the administrative search warrant is granted to the agency as opposed to the law enforcement officer, and then your personnel would then be able to go and execute that warrant, perhaps for safety reasons with a law enforcement officer with you.
We already have the ability to go in. Any license holder has given us the ability to enter the premises at any time during their normal business hours. And part of the rules are that everybody has to have 8 hours of business hours every week. And we can go in and do the inspection. So that's not the issue. We can always go in at any time during normal business hours to inspect. And obviously, if there are animal cruelty issues, then we refer those to local law enforcement. We then assist local law enforcement in determining whether animal cruelty exists, because obviously police don't have the expertise generally. Now, some do have with their animal control, and we're not involved in every single case of animal cruelty in the state because they feel they have the expertise. But they call us in many cases, and we do the body scores and look at the conditions and make a recommendation to them that animals be seized. Sometimes it's not every animal in every case. There may be, a number of them, and others are left in place. So it's very complicated, but getting into those licensed facilities, what we're talking about here, is not an issue at all.
Senator Gatter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, hearkening to your comments about a $1,000 fine for a guy that sells an animal for $4,000, would it make sense to proportionalize the fines to the gross revenues of the agency, so that there is really an incentive to comply?
No, I think we run, if I'm remembering correctly, I think we run up against that issue of a fine that is a misdemeanor, and then you get into a whole different category. So I don't think that we can potentially, on per incident, increase that fine. Of course, the legislature can do pretty much whatever it wants, but I don't think I could come forward and recommend that a fine be increased. And I'm not sure, how that would work just off the top of my head, but that certainly is an issue, because the fines are not necessarily a disincentive to people.
Follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we remove the misdemeanor, right, and then you don't have any constraints about what the level of fines are appropriate in the judicial system for a particular level of crime, decriminalize it, but make it a fine that will definitely get, the attention of the violator.
That's certainly, anything that gets us to bring people into compliance, but fines don't necessarily do that, because, as was said, some of this is mental health issues, and we can't fix that with fines. So, but I'm open to anything that allows us to move forward and be more effective in doing what you've asked us to do.
Okay. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Commissioner. We appreciate your time. Anybody else want to speak on this? Follow-ups? None? Seeing none, we will close the hearing. Thank you very much. All right. And do you need a break, or do you want to just plow through? Plow through. All right, we'll hear from the sponsor of SB 369, Senator Khan.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Thank you for hearing Senate Bill 369. Clearly, my background is not in farming, but I live in Western New Hampshire. And one of the clear characteristics of Western New Hampshire is the preservation of an agrarian lifestyle. We have a great number of farms, and you grow to have an appreciation for what they add to the culture, to the landscape, and the preservation of the historical character of farming in New Hampshire. As it has evolved, farming is become a localvore kind of experience, where local communities support local farms. And our local farms are not large. They're not large Midwestern or West Coast farms. They are smaller because of our geography, and they have to add value to the products that they produce. The value is often in the products that they produce, yogurt, frozen yogurts, the like, or with organics and their organic approach to producing their products. When the Department of Agriculture, let me back up, the way in which an organic producer can market and grow their products has to be certified. That is a federal standard. And that certification historically has been done by the New Hampshire's Department of Agriculture. In September of this year, the department, without any notice to the producers, wrote that they were going to cease doing certifications for small farm producers, those that grow livestock or are food processors, both of whom rely on organic certifications. That's 42 farms and producers in the state of New Hampshire. The number is not large, but our overall farming community in New Hampshire isn't large either. It's a sum total of 124 farms, many of which, when it comes to organic processing, and I guess I just misstated that, maybe there are more farms, there are 124 total organic farmers, many of which are maple syrup. So we're not talking about the maple syrup crops. We are talking about livestock, poultry, and value-added products. Those farms, their annual incomes, they probably vary between $50,000 and one food or organic processor, Badger Balm, which is in my district, has annual sales of $14 million. So these producers vary in size and complexity. When that was withdrawn, I was approached, as a number of other legislators were approached, that one, it was abrupt, it lacked consultation with the user community, and that it would be a disruption to the work that these farms undertake. Their options were go to other states or find a private certifier, but the state of New Hampshire would no longer be doing it. I began a conversation with the commissioner where he indicated what the additional costs would be, and we've worked that into the bill, maybe $350,000 on top of what the department had been using in the past to do the certifications. I leave that to the director, to the commissioner, to identify what that cost is. Right now, the program is supported by fees. I think all 42 of the affected producers would recognize that their fees need to go up. As a result, they're going to go up anyway. They're going to go up if they go out of state, and they're going to go up if they use private certifiers, and they would go up if the department continued to do the work. They're willing to accept some of that. It would take some time for the state to develop some additional rules around the state certification program, train some staff. There's probably a need to get some bridge funding. But here's the point of the bill. The point of the bill is not to demand that the department continue to hire the staff and do it the way that they've done it in the past. It's find a way to continue to brand New Hampshire grown and produced products and give them that certification and a New Hampshire brand. These are New Hampshire farmers. They're proud of what they do. They want a New Hampshire sticker. An interesting question proposed by Representative Dan Wolf, happens to grow eggs. He says, what is an egg certified by the state of Maine? Grown in New Hampshire, certified in the state of Maine. What is it? Well, it's a Maine grown certified egg, probably, is the way it's going to be perceived. Because right on that packaging of eggs, it's going to have this sticker. It's going to say certified by the state of Maine. That's not the way they want to be branded. A couple of years ago, the commissioner and I, we were partnering on a Buy New Hampshire labeling program. It was designed to assist New Hampshire milk producers who are under constant pressure. Didn't go anywhere, but I'm saying that in a manner of, I'm committed to trying to help the farmers in my community. I think we all have farms in our community. We recognize how close to the margin these folks operate. And they want to be branded and marketed as New Hampshire producers. It's their way of seeing their products in the marketplace and potentially growing our farming business back in the state. So I ask the committee, this does not have a single route. It doesn't demand that the department hire 6 staff to do it. It just says that the department shall operate some type of certification that's New Hampshire certification. It can be in partnership with another state. I would guess that the number of the livestock and food processing additive organic grown producers in Vermont and in Maine are probably also small numbers. Is that a method of sharing the resource across states? Is it a method to retain on retainer at a certain fixed number people who will certify independently in the state of New Hampshire? We can approach this all 3 ways or any of the above. And that's what the farmers and food processors are asking, is that we do this with a New Hampshire brand and a New Hampshire way to continue to preserve what they see as their identity, New Hampshire farmers and producers. So that's my testimony, Mr. Chairman. I'd be glad to take any questions. And I will apologize. There was a lineup of a number of speakers who are mired in frozen parts of the state with short staff, and a couple of those, the Badger Balm, Stonewall Farm, they have dropped off my supporters list for testimony today, but I think you've got letters from both of them.
We have. Thank you. And Senator Gatter with a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator, for your testimony. You mentioned that the organic farmers currently or were paying fees. Can you quantify those fees for the committee?
I can't, but they are on a sliding scale. So a small producer would pay at a low rate, which was, I believe, around $500 for certification. And those would range upward based on the amount of product produced.
Perhaps maybe the commissioner might be able to share that. Thank you.
Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator Khan, in terms of the cost of this program, so am I correctly understanding there's about a couple hundred, that the department has a couple $100,000 at currently for this?
It would seem that way, Senator. That the total cost of the effort would be upwards of $500. I think $550,000 is the budget that is shown here, and a budget request of $350,000 to fund above that dollar amount if all of the staff were hired by the Department of Agriculture. Leaves me to think that there's $200,000 that the department had and continues to have in its budget to support the New Hampshire certification program.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in terms of the programs that they're no longer offering certification for, the livestock handler and wild crop, do our neighboring states, state departments offer that certification for those programs?
Yes, Maine and Massachusetts do. And I think Vermont does, and I think the commissioner is familiar with our surrounding states and who is doing it.
So if I may follow up, this would then create a difficulty for those folks to stay in business in this state if they want to operate organically, whereas in the neighboring states, somebody doing the same thing would be able to get certified and therefore keep offering the organic products.
The Go Fish card that the producers were offered is causing them to go to Bay State certifiers or Maine certifiers and asking those states to certify their product.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Senator Gatter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So am I correct in stating that the federal government sets the standards for what will be considered marketable as an organic product?
Yes.
Okay, do we know if this federal government,
follow up?
Do we know if the federal government provides any inspection staff for the certification of organic farms?
I don't believe that they do, and what there is a program that I believe reimburses local farms for a certain portion of the fees that they have to pay to be certified organic.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you.
Commissioner Jasper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I still am who I was and still am commissioner. So I first want to thank the sponsor of the bill for bringing this forward and for working for the organic farmers of New Hampshire. I appreciate that. I appreciate his passion and his work for this. Unfortunately, I have to rise in opposition to the bill. Our rollout of what happened in announcing that we were not going to be doing the inspections for the animal and the processors was inelegant, to say the least. That being said, it was not without notice, because no one was left without 6 months' notice that they needed to apply for a new inspection agency. So we didn't just say tough luck. As a matter of fact, we continued to do certifications for several months afterwards to make sure that everybody had at least that 6 months. So anybody who might have been less than that, we continued to do that certification. We did not leave anybody hanging. And I think the number is 42 who fall into that category. But it's also, so what's happened with those 42, my understanding is 11 of them have decided not to move forward with organic certification anymore, and the others have found new certifiers who they are in the process of working with. So what happened with us was our director left, giving me 2 weeks notice, and on the way out the door said, and by the way, you really need to drop certification for the processors and the animal people. My first reaction was, no, we're not going to do that. But as Dave Russo, who was acting director, doing double duty because he is the director of pesticide control, took over temporarily as director of regulatory services. As he worked with the staff and talked about it, he realized there was no way that we could continue to do those certifications. It was just not possible for us. Not only had we lost a director who was one of the primary people in this, we'd lost our part-time certifier, leaving us with one person devoted not all of her time to this program. That was the one person left who was really in charge. Others working on it, but probably not to the standards that USDA wants us to work at. Our primary concern was that we might not be doing the inspections in a way that was going to comply to what USDA wanted us to do, and therefore we could be putting those producers at risk. And in fact, I think we were. Now, question was, how much money are we talking about here? For the people that we're dealing with, the 42 people we were dealing with, although the fiscal note will show $33,000, the actual money last year was half of that, $16,420. So to spend $350,000, even with the fiscal note, and I will disagree with the senator, I think we might have had some miscommunications. We don't have $200,000 that we devote to this program now. We have the one person who's primarily responsible, and that's only part of her job, and we have a couple others going in. So I would say if we were to, work this all out, maybe, and this is off the top of my head without the director weighing in, but maybe $100,000. But USDA wants us to do a better job. First of all, let me explain to you, they do not like states doing the certification. Normally, it is private organizations. In many of the states, it's the NOFA, which is their organic organization. In our case, it's NOFA, New Hampshire. As I've looked into this, what happened when this started was NOFA, New Hampshire was doing or trying to do the inspections. At that time, they didn't have the resources to do it as many of the other states did. And so they worked with the department and the director at that time to have us take on this program voluntarily. And of course, many years ago, it was much simpler. So while I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, particularly my own people, I'm going to throw my department under the bus a little bit. This audit was done when we had all the people that we had on board. This was in 2020, and they just got around to doing this. We got the report in, I think, early December. We had to respond to it by late December, and since then we've heard back from them again. So in the audit, and that's what they do audits of what we do. The inspector did not verify the labels being used by the operation, were the same as approved by the certifier. The inspector did not verify materials being used. The inspector did not verify composition of organic products. The inspector did not verify documentation of cleaning equipment. The inspector did not verify residue testing on equipment as indicated on the organic system plan. And there's a lot here, and that's why I'm turning pages, because I wanted to highlight a few. The 2016 New Hampshire Department of Agriculture Markets and Food Program review was conducted by the Organic Regulatory Program Director and organic inspectors. Personnel that conduct certification activities may not conduct the annual internal review of their own organic certification program. That's why the cost is so high in coming into compliance, because we have to have separate staff that does not do the inspections. All they do is the reviews, and that becomes very, very costly. I was shocked at the cost, and I continued to push my staff back and say, really, this is what it's going to cost, $500,000 a year? Yes, to comply with USDA, which we are not under compliance. Does not fully carry out the procedures of NOP 2613, instruction responding to results from pesticide residue testing. The inspectors do not fully verify the accuracy of operations organic system plan. Does not provide sufficient information to the applicants to enable them to comply with the regulations. Did not fully review an application to ensure competence. Yeah, now I've screwed up the words. I can't say competent with the. Does not consistently use adequately trained personnel to comply with and implement USDA organic certification program. New Hampshire settlement agreements do not comply with the requirements of the USDA organic regulations. Those are just a few. You can see where we're sunk here. We are up for recertification for, it's not the word, accreditation, thank you. Accreditation in April. We could not possibly meet that, even if this bill were to pass, and I think we all know it wouldn't become law by April, we couldn't comply. We think we can with the vegetables, the fruit, and the maple. We believe that we can continue the program as we have it, but there is so much more complexity in the processes and the animal part of it that we cannot possibly do this. So as much as we appreciate what the sponsor's intent is, we can't do that. We're even if, and I just asked the former acting director, if we could be accredited by using contractors. He doesn't know. Intuitively, I would say no, that if we're using somebody else, we can't be accredited. We could only be accredited using our own personnel. But that gets very, very complicated for us to try to have contracts. There are people out there who can do them. We're hopeful that NOFA New Hampshire would eventually be able to stand up a program, but regardless, we're not in a situation where we can do this. And I would suggest to you that if you thought that $350,000, and let's just use that as the minimum, were a reasonable amount for 42 private businesses, we would be better off cutting checks to them for the cost of having an outside certifier come in. This would not be state money well spent, in my opinion.
Senator Gaida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony, Commissioner. Do you have any sense of the costs for a farm to certify using either another state or a private organization?
I had those numbers, and I think it was in the $3,000. It does vary on the size, but certainly, depending on the scale. This is why I think because our fees were set in statute and are set in statute. We can't change those without legislative approval. And I think you all know how popular that is, to change a fee in a statute. We're much cheaper than anybody else, obviously, but for somebody who is doing this on a full-time basis, it's not an onerous fee. But unfortunately, it's not one of these things where, well, we could do small people, because the standards are still the same for USDA. And this is just to hire 5 people to do this. It just makes no economic sense to me whatsoever.
Well, it's just a comment. If I understand that you said 11 are no longer in, so we're down to 31. At $350,000, not 500, but 350, that's $11,290 per farm for the state to pay for the cost of something that in the private sector is, I'm going to almost assert, with certainty will cost less, even on a sliding scale basis. So economically, I think I agree with you that it does not make sense.
And I do feel very, very badly for those small producers, somebody who might have 100 chickens who want it to be certified. But regardless, I mean, it's not something that we have the ability to do. I can't even fathom us doing that. And because if I had $350,000 more dollars in my budget, this would not be where I would want to put it, because I think we could do a lot more things that would benefit the larger agricultural community in the state of New Hampshire, because this is a small segment, and we're not focused on just organic. We're looking at everything, and I want to support organic. Don't get me wrong for a moment, but this is not a good use of state resources, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? I haven't heard from you at all today. You are. And we appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Representative Bixby.
Thank you for taking my testimony. For the record, I'm Representative Peter Bixby from Dover, New Hampshire, representing Stratford District 17. And I'd like to basically give a little bit of background in terms of organic farming and the role that certification plays in that. So this is essentially information that you can use in order to come to a judgment. And I am a sponsor of a co-sponsor of HB 369, and I think that I still support the goal, but having heard the Commissioner's testimony about the audit, I am having some questions myself. So, in terms of organic farming essentially started in the first half of the 20th century, and the basic idea was that supporting soil organisms and soil health and making sure that soil was biologically active was the best way to support good crops. And that involved essentially having a lot of organic matter, decomposing plant matter, compost, etc. And along with that came the idea that synthetic additives, synthetic fertilizers, synthetic pesticides would harm the soil biology. Organic farming remained a fairly small niche for the first half of the 20th century. In the latter half of the 20th century, there was increased suspicion of chemical additives to agriculture, and there became more of a customer base for it. Organic farming has always been labor intensive, and as a result, it's more expensive. And because the prices for organic goods were higher, there was also an incentive to cheat. And as a result of that, organic farming organizations started to create certification programs to say, we know that these farms are not cheating. That was all on a private basis. Those organic farming organizations, so for instance, NOFA, New Hampshire, NOFA in the northeastern states, Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, there are a number of other organizations across the country. They would do a combination of certifying that the crops were in fact organically grown and doing advocacy for the organic movement and doing advising to farmers. At that point, there were different standards across all those different independent certifying organizations, and this was recognized to be a problem as the business became bigger. And in 1990, the Federal Organic Food Production Act was passed. It took them about 12 years to put the entire rule set together because it's pretty complicated. And in 2002, that went online. At that point, certifying organizations had to be accredited by the USDA and follow USDA standards. And at that time also, those organizations that had formerly done that combination of advising, advocacy, and accrediting had to separate their advocacy and advising operations from their accrediting, so there was a clear separation, which makes sense for accountability. One result of that was that NOFA New Hampshire, which had formerly done the accrediting in New Hampshire, realized they did not have the organizational capacity to do both the advising advocacy role and the accrediting role, and they asked the Department of Agriculture to take on that accrediting role, or that certifying role. So at that point, the department became a certified under the USDA program. Certification, so the USDA accredits certifiers both in the private sector and state programs, and they don't really see a significant difference in terms of what they demand of them. So a private organization like the Maine Organic Farmers Gardeners Association, NOFA Vermont, Bay State Certifiers, all of those are accredited by the USDA, and any accredited certifier can certify anybody in the country. There is a tendency among farmers to really want to be accredited by a relatively local or regional certifier. This is even more so the case with smaller farmers. In the organic rule, there are 4 main branches of certification. There is produce crops, livestock, wild crops, and processing and handling. And each of those has a different level, demands and levels of complexity. For produce crops, the question is the certified entity using all appropriate inputs? In other words, are they using fertilizers and pesticides that are considered acceptable by the Organic Standards Board? And are they following procedures that eliminate cross-contamination between conventional agriculture and organic? So, for instance, someone could not use reuse packaging that had been used on a conventional crop because it would not necessarily meet the cleanliness standards for the National Organic Standards. So that's for produce crops. It's relatively straightforward. Livestock becomes more complicated because you also have to look into what is the sourcing of the feed, what sorts of medications are being used, do the animals have an appropriate access to pasture, and are the animals sourced appropriately? So an animal that goes into a organic livestock operation has to have been fed exclusively organic feed for some period of time prior to being going to that organic operation. Wild crops is more, it's a little, I'm not gonna touch too much on that, but it's things like.
I'd
maple
appreciate
syrup.
it. We're kind of running out of time,
Okay,
so.
so I will just sort of, and processing and handling, once again, it's a matter of looking at the sourcing. So the department has done all four. The department doesn't have obviously doesn't have the resources to do it correctly at this point, according to that audit. One thing that the commissioner didn't mention was the size of the fees that they are currently getting, which is roughly $250 per certification for whatever size. The certifiers in the area range from somewhere in the ballpark of $500 to $700 for a over 5,000 but under 10,000 operation to into the multiple thousands of dollars for someone who's doing 100,000 or $1 million of business. It's on a sliding scale. And given the commissioner's testimony, I'm not going to say pass this bill as it is. I'm going to say we need to still look at the fees that are being used to support the produce crop program, because I don't think that our current fee structure for that is appropriate, and I think we are essentially using general department funds to support the produce certification, which he has said he still wants to continue. So I would say take this bill, rework it to make the fee structure for the produce portion, the produce crops portion, more appropriate, and that will put that portion, which he says he still wants to do, on better footing.
Thank you for your brevity. Thank you, and I appreciate your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee?
I'm happy to take questions.
Seeing none. Thank you very much. Tom? Yeah, we're going to end up losing some of our committee hearing meeting friends, so I'm just, I hate to rush people.
Bear with me, I'm usually in a field talking with
I hear you.
families, so
Go
this
for
is not. My name's Tom Beaudry. I live in Walpole. I'm here representing myself, and you could say a few dairy farmers as well. I've been involved in agriculture in New Hampshire for over 45 years. Now I work primarily as a crop advisor with both organic and conventional farms, mostly dairy farms. I had a dairy farm I stopped about 3 years ago. I now raise some grass-fed beef. I'm also involved with the only fertilizer plant in New England that handles only organic material, okay? And that's located in Walpole as well. So when the department sent the letters out, I got calls from all of the dairy farms that I deal with saying, what are we going to do? And I will disagree with Commissioner Jasper on his notice, because most of those were right around the 1st of October, and they had to know who their certifier was going to be for next year by the 1st of January. So it was a 3-month window, and it's short. They understood that the department was under some fiscal problems with the certifying, and we're actually in favor of seeing fees go up, which I know were set by the in a bill somewhere, but they would not mind seeing those go up at all. Personally, I believe that the Department of Ag should continue and be involved with the organic certification program, okay? This has been going on for, I'm gonna say 30 years, because back in, I don't remember if it was 91 or 92, I met with Stonyfield, Sam Kamen, and prior Commissioner Taylor was there, and Vicki Smith, and I was managing a dairy farm in Walpole. They wanted our milk. And the department at that time was very involved with helping to get transition to organic and certified. People have come to expect that. if there needs to be an increase in fees, that's fine. I can't speak about Badger Bond because that's totally different, but most of the dairy farms that are affected only milk from 20 to 40 cows. They are not large farms at all. And I believe that the department should be strongly promoting agriculture in all forms in the state and doing what they can to ensure that they remain. Any questions?
Thank you for your testimony. Can we have that copy of that?
Sure.
Thank you very much.
It's handwritten. I hope you can read it.
I don't have to.
Okay.
He does. Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee?
Good.
Thank you, and appreciate you driving out here to testify. Yep. Thank you. Robert Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, again, Rob Johnson, representing the New Hampshire Farm Bureau as the Federation's policy director. Farm Bureau policy supports a self-sustaining organic marketing certification program within the State Department of Agriculture. We see it as agricultural development. It just should be there. There are 14 states in total, I believe, I may be off account, but 14 states that have certification programs. In New England is New Hampshire, small program in Rhode Island, and New Jersey has one as well. New York State does as well, and then it's the rest of the country. We in Farm Bureau, we have in the range of 50 members who are certified organic producers, either or are currently or within very recent times. Nationwide, there are nearly 50,000. And from where on, I'm going to kind of just give you a few statistics and answer some questions. Just some of what I have planned on saying has been said. Why do people support the state agency doing it as opposed to, I want to clarify something in some of the other states. Like again, I said New Hampshire and Rhode Island are the only two state programs. The programs in Maine, Vermont, Massachusetts, they're private entities that are running those programs, okay? And in many parts of the country, there are 76 certifying agencies across the country. 76, 14 of them are states. And some of the major reasons that our producers support the state doing it is they believe that and see that if they have an issue, when they go to the state, they have recourse. If it's a private entity, they don't see where they have any recourse. They're not going to hear their concerns like the state would, and does on many number of other issues. They work with the staff and the commissioner on a number of issues, and they have a lot of faith in them. They respect them. They see it as it's just one-stop shopping, you could say, where they deal with the department and other issues, and this is another one on the marketing side of their product. Senator Khan earlier mentioned the branding side of things. I get, from my understanding is there can be different stickers that can be placed on it. It could be a USDA certification, but can also be the certifying entity, which if it's the New Hampshire Department of Agriculture, that does that assists them in marketing and selling their product. That the New Hampshire customer sees that our Department of Agriculture has looked at this process and has certified it, okayed it. If you go to the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service, which the National Organic Program is under, you'll see where there's a note saying that those interested in becoming certified, one thing they want to take into consideration is where the certifying agency is located. And that's because of them, travel is a big one, which adds to what? Expense. And again, I'll just say that, again, that our Department of Agriculture, the staff over the years and commissioners and all are looked very well upon by New Hampshire farmers and our members. And I got to say, by coming out in opposition to what I'd say opposition to the department's position is a position that we at Farm Bureau do not like to take at all. Believe me, we work closely together, but it's something that was, in discussing this, was a real issue with us. And answering a few more questions, I just want you to be aware that for very small organic producers, there is an exemption. If you have gross sales of $1,500 or less, you can still sell your products organic. You still need to comply, but you do not have to go through the certification process. So there is a accommodation for very small producers. For your information, the RSA setting the fees is RSA 426:8-A. And as has been said earlier by Mr. Boudry and also Representative Bixby, I have not heard one producer who would be opposed to an increase in fees. Not one. They understand it needs to happen. I mean, they were set back in, it was a number of years ago, 2013, as a citation as the last time at least the 426:8-A was amended. And lastly, I'll say that one of the questions I'm being asked is, our Department of Agriculture is telling us they can't do it. Well, you look at the numbers, there are 3 or 4 other state agencies that have numbers. We have about 150, just under, certified organic producers in New Hampshire for whether it be livestock, crops, or handling processors. There are 3 or 4 states that have fewer, and there are a number of states that have just a few more, 214 in Kentucky, 269 in Idaho. On the other side, 21 in Rhode Island, 89 and 98 in New Jersey. If they can do it, why can't we? Is the question I'm receiving. And particularly our concern within Farm Bureau is our crops and the livestock people. In particular, we'd just like to see that from the department, what would it take to do it? Thank you for your time as always, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And question, Senator Gaida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rob, thank you for testifying. Do you have any idea, 2 questions, how many of our farms are under the $1,500 threshold?
I wouldn't know, because they don't need to register or
report that or anything.
It's right.
All right, so we don't know how many are small.
No.
Do you have any sense, is there any fee structure in any comparable state that might be applicable to what we might want to look at doing here?
I'd have to research it, Senator. I haven't.
I would appreciate that, some numbers and so forth, to find out if, is there feasibility to this? Because I said the cost as it stands right now, purely on a financial, and obviously there's other factors in finance, but purely on a financial basis, it doesn't make sense for the department to do this.
And you're correct. And like I said at the beginning, that we support a self-sustaining program. And for years, we understood that it was. And obviously things have changed. And as the commissioner said, I mean, the program is, as it has gone over the years, it has become more demanding on the certifying agencies, no doubt.
If you, as a Farm Bureau person, you have resources, I think, nationally.
Mm-hmm.
If you could get, the cost of what inspections cost by a private provider in Massachusetts or Maine or whoever, and as well, as I said, the fee structures in other states that have the certification. I think that would be helpful for me, and I would certainly imagine it might be helpful for the members of the committee as well.
Certainly.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. And due to time, we're going to close the hearing. I don't see anybody else here ready to testify. We're going to close the hearing on this. And I entertain a motion to move into exec.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye? Okay. The ayes have it. Is there a motion on SB 267, establishing upland invasive species program?
I'll move ought to pass, and it will be amended, so I don't know if to address the amendment, and then I'll amend that on the floor as well. But
sounds good.
However you want to handle it.
Yeah, we can amend it on the floor. I want to get it moving. It's an FN, so further discussion.
So the motion is ought to pass.
Yeah, Senator Guider, do you want to do the amendment we have in hand now?
We can do that now.
Yeah.
Well, I'll move the amendment.
Okay, I'll second that.
Discussion? It's 0020S.
And just my comment on the amendment is that, we heard from Senator Perkins about prioritizing, this way or that. But I think that the way the amendment is put together is the right way to do it. is it in the toolbox? You know, sure, try to prioritize non-chemical things, but we've got to trust these experts, I think, on that. So I think the amendment really does what needs to be done there. And also, I will say, too, that I don't understand why there could be any confusion about invasive species here. We're not talking about, you know, fauna or insects. It's herbicides. But if you think now in our committee amendment, you want to clarify invasive species, meaning.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'd actually written down a number of notes. I want to probably bring in a floor amendment.
All right,
If we
good.
want to get this
Good
out.
way to go. Yep,
We'll do a
thank
floor
you.
amendment so we can get the process moving.
Yep.
Further discussion? You said no.
Well, Mr. Chair, you know, if we're, you know, pass this thing this week or next week, I don't see difference except that if you know, we do it with a floor amendment, you know, we're in hurry-up mode. And I don't think that that's good for legislation. So, you know, we have an amendment here. We say we're going to have another amendment that's going to be on the floor. If we pass this thing next week, it'll still go in the calendar, you know, for, and so I don't see that, you know, why we are hurrying.
A lot of invasive species are crawling out there. I'd just like to move things forward, that's all. I like to get things done. Any further discussion? All right, motion on the amendment is out to pass. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the amendment passes, and motion on the bill itself. Is there a motion to pass as amended?
Yeah, I'll move on to pass as amended.
Second.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and so we'll move that forward. Senator Gatta, would you like to take that out?
Yes.
All right. So I would like to address the feasibility study real quickly.
I'll move on to pass.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Discussion.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think that what we heard was that the preferences for his Hampton Beach Area Commission to do this, and that we would add and maintaining to what is studying. So I think we could do a committee amendment that states on line 1, the Hampton Beach Advisory Commission.
Daley, you got that? Okay. Yep.
Shall study the feasibility and impacts of constructing and maintaining a pier directly south of Boar's Head in the town of Hampton. You got it?
Hampton Beach.
Area Commission.
Hampton Beach Area Commission on
Bill.
line 1 in lieu of Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Services.
Right.
And then on line 2, impacts of constructing and maintaining.
Right. And then on line 7, I would say 150K. So if that makes sense, Mr. Chairman, I think that's a committee amendment. We could vote on it. I'll move that as an amendment.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Seeing none. So we move the amendment.
Oh, yeah, ought to pass as amended.
Second.
Seconded by Senator Gatta. Any discussion?
I'll just say that I will look, I'll work with Senator Stiles and others to see what portion of this might be done in the 10-year plan as part of the Ocean Boulevard plan. We obviously can't build that, I don't think we can build a pier, but I think we could get everything right up to it because it is part of the integrated transportation right there. So we'll see. That's in the future. I just want to mention that for the cost.
So, question, is that 150K non-lapsing? I don't recall from the bill itself.
Well, the study is gonna be done by the 1st of November.
But we're gonna change fiscal years at the end of this, end of June. So we may wanna make some assertion that,
All right, let's, so, you'd like, you think that.
I think it would make sense, otherwise
We'll
they
just go
have,
to
if they haven't been
finance. We'll just go
spent
to-
by the end of the.
This is gonna go to finance, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Well, let's,
we'll do it there.
yeah.
Okay.
All in favor of the bill?
Senator, just looking at the committee amendment, we've changed the entity doing the study to the Hampton Beach Area Commission, but there are still references to Commissioner and the Department of Environmental Services later in the bill. Do you want that, is that appropriate to remain, or should that also?
So, I'm sorry. I'm gonna,
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
I think it would be more appropriate, let's do this, slow it down. Well, deference to Senator Gray, because I think we're starting to change stuff on the fly.
Okay.
I think we could do this and bring an amendment in next week and
All
get
right,
this
let's
done
do
next
that.
week. I think that makes a lot more sense.
Thank you, Senator Guida. Let's do it.
All right. So I think we'll just leave it at that for now. Is there a motion to move out of exec?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, we are adjourned. It's all right, it's good.